The sky above the small town of Silver Ridge was an eerie shade of orange, streaked with dark clouds that seemed alive. No one in the town had seen anything like it before. The air smelled metallic, and there was a strange hum vibrating through everything, a sound that made people uneasy. But amidst all this chaos stood two figures on opposite sides of destiny. One figure was tall and slender, her skin shimmering faintly under the unnatural light. She wasn't human, everyone could tell by just looking at her. Her large, almond-shaped eyes glowed softly, reflecting both fear and determination. She called herself Lyra, though no one knew what planet she came from or why she'd landed here. All they knew was that she had crash-landed 3 days ago, her ship now nothing more than twisted metal buried deep in the woods outside town. The other figure was shorter, wearing a tattered jacket and holding a flashlight that flickered weakly against the growing darkness. His name was Jake, a mechanic who spent most of his life fixing cars and avoiding trouble. He wasn't brave, nor did he have any grand plans for heroics. Yet tonight, as fate would have it, he found himself standing face to face with something far beyond his understanding. Jake first met Lyra when he heard rumors about a strange object crashing near Blackwater Creek. Curiosity got the better of him, and armed only with his old wrench and some courage he didn't know he had, he ventured into the forest. What he found changed everything. Lyra lay unconscious beside the wreckage of her craft, her body emitting a faint blue glow. At first, Jake thought she was dead, until her eyes snapped open, locking onto his with an intensity that froze him mid-step. Despite the language barrier, communication between them came surprisingly easily. Through gestures, drawings, and broken phrases, Jake learned fragments of her story. Her home world was dying, consumed by fire and war. She had been sent on a desperate mission to find help, but something went wrong during the journey. Now stranded, Lyra carried a device, a small orb glowing faintly green, that held the key to saving her people. Or so she claimed. But not everyone in Silver Ridge saw Lyra as a lost traveler seeking aid. Most saw her as a threat, a monster sent to destroy them. Rumors spread quickly among the townsfolk, fueled by fear and panic. By the third day, a mob had formed, led by Sheriff Grayson, a gruff man whose distrust of outsiders ran deep. "They say she's dangerous," muttered one of the men in the crowd, clutching a makeshift torch. "We can't take chances." "She doesn't belong here," shouted another, his voice trembling with anger. "Burn the thing before it brings us harm." And so, the mob marched toward the edge of the forest where Jake had hidden Lyra, determined to rid themselves of the alien presence once and for all. As the angry voices grew louder, Jake stood protectively in front of Lyra, his heart pounding wildly. Behind him, Lyra clutched the green orb tightly, her expression unreadable. She didn't understand their words, but the hostility in the air was unmistakable. Fear radiated off her in waves, yet there was also resolve, a quiet strength that surprised even Jake. "Stay back!" Jake yelled, raising his hands in warning. "You don't know what you're doing!" Grayson stepped forward, his face grim. "Move aside, kid! This isn't your fight." "Yes, it is!" Jake shot back, surprising himself with the force of his own voice. "She hasn't hurt anyone. You're just scared because she's different." Murmurs rippled through the crowd, but the torches remained lit, their flames casting long shadows across the clearing. Someone threw a rock, narrowly missing Jake's head. Another followed, striking the ground near Lyra's feet. She flinched but didn't move, her gaze fixed on the approaching mob. Jake glanced over his shoulder at her, his mind racing. He couldn't fight them all, but he couldn't let them hurt her either. Not after everything she told him, not after seeing the desperation in her eyes when she spoke of her dying world. "I'll stop them," he whispered to himself, gripping the flashlight tighter. Somehow. Little did he know, stopping them would mean risking more than just his safety. It would mean confronting the darkest parts of humanity, and making a choice that could change both their lives forever. The tension in the clearing was palpable, thick enough to choke on. Jake's breath came in short bursts as he stared down Sheriff Grayson and the mob behind him. Their torches flickered menacingly, casting eerie shadows that danced across the trees. The air smelled of smoke and sweat, and every step the mob took forward felt like another nail being hammered into Jake's coffin. "Kid, I'm giving you one last chance," Grayson growled, his voice low but firm. "Step aside. This thing doesn't belong here." Jake clenched his fists, his knuckles white around the flashlight. His mind raced, searching for something, anything, he could say to make them stop. But how do you reason with fear? How do you explain to people who see only danger that what they're about to destroy might be their salvation? "She's not dangerous!" Jake shouted, his voice cracking under the strain. "She's just trying to survive!" A woman near the front of the crowd scoffed, her eyes narrowed. "Survive? By bringing whatever mess she's running from straight to us. We don't even know what she is." "That's right," someone else chimed in. "For all we know, she's some kind of spy or weapon." Lyra shifted slightly behind Jake, her glowing green orb held close to her chest. She didn't speak, she didn't need to. Her posture said it all, she was scared, cornered, and utterly alone. But there was also a quiet dignity in the way she stood, as if she refused to let fear break her completely. Jake glanced back at her briefly, his heart sinking. He knew he couldn't protect her forever, not against an entire town armed with pitchforks and fire. If he didn't think of something fast, this night would end in disaster. And yet, despite the overwhelming odds, a stubborn part of him refused to give up. "Listen to me!" Jake yelled again, desperation creeping into his tone. "If you hurt her, you'll regret it. She has something important. Something that could save lives." Grayson raised an eyebrow, clearly skeptical. "Save lives? Don't make me laugh, kid. All I see is trouble." Jake hesitated, unsure how much to reveal. Lyra had trusted him with her secret. The glowing orb contained technology far beyond anything Earth had ever seen. It was a device capable of repairing ecosystems, reversing damage caused by pollution, war, or natural disasters. She had shown him glimpses of its power during their brief time together, using it to heal a dying tree and purify a polluted stream. But explaining that now, in front of a hostile mob, seemed impossible. "It's true," Jake insisted, his voice rising. "She showed me. That thing she's holding, it can fix things. Clean water, grow food, heal the land, it can do all of it." The crowd murmured uncertainly, some glancing at each other in confusion. A few looked intrigued, but most remained unconvinced. Fear was a powerful motivator, and once it took hold, logic often struggled to find a foothold. "You expect us to believe that?" Grayson snapped, stepping closer. "Some glowing ball is gonna solve all our problems? Sounds like a fairy tale to me." "It's not a fairy tale," Jake shot back, his frustration boiling over. "Look at her. Does she look like she wants to hurt anyone? She's scared, same as us. But instead of helping her, you want to burn her alive?" His words hung in the air, sharp and accusing. For a moment, the mob faltered, their resolve wavering. Some lowered their torches slightly, doubt creeping into their expressions. But then someone in the back shouted, "Don't listen to him. He's been brainwashed by that thing." The accusation reignited the mob's fury. Torches were raised higher, and angry shouts filled the clearing once more. Jake realized with growing dread that reasoning with them wasn't going to work. They weren't listening, not really. To them, Lyra was a threat, plain and simple, and threats needed to be eliminated. "Jake," Lyra whispered softly, her voice barely audible over the din. He turned to see her looking at him, her glowing eyes filled with sadness and gratitude. In that moment, he understood what she wanted to say without words, "Thank you for trying." But Jake wasn't ready to give up yet. Not while there was still a sliver of hope. "Fine," he said suddenly, raising his hands in surrender. "You want proof? I'll show you proof." The crowd fell silent, staring at him in confusion. Even Grayson looked taken aback. "What are you talking about, kid?" Jake pointed toward the nearby creek, its waters murky and lifeless after years of neglect. "That stream over there, it's dead, right? Polluted, full of trash and chemicals." Watch what happens when I use the orb. Without waiting for permission, he reached out and gently took the glowing sphere from Lyra's hands. She hesitated for a split second before letting go, her trust in him absolute. Jake swallowed hard, feeling the weight of responsibility settle onto his shoulders. This was it, the moment of truth. He walked slowly to the edge of the creek, ignoring the suspicious glares of the mob. Kneeling beside the water, he held the orb above the surface and focused. At first, nothing happened. Then, slowly, the orb began to pulse with light, its glow intensifying until it illuminated the entire area. Gasps rippled through the crowd as the water shimmered and transformed. The murky brown turned crystal clear, fish darted beneath the surface, and plants sprouted along the banks, vibrant and green. Even the foul smell vanished, replaced by the fresh scent of clean earth and flowing water. For a moment, no one spoke. The mob stood frozen, staring in awe at the miracle unfolding before their eyes. Even Grayson looked shaken, his usual stern expression replaced by wide-eyed disbelief. "See?" Jake said, his voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through him. "This is what she can do. Imagine what else is possible if you just give her a chance." The silence stretched on, heavy with uncertainty. Some in the crowd exchanged hopeful glances, while others scowled, unwilling to let go of their fears so easily. But before anyone could respond, a loud crack echoed through the clearing. Everyone turned to see flames licking at the base of a nearby tree, set ablaze by a stray torch someone had dropped in their shock. Panic erupted instantly, spreading faster than the fire itself. People scrambled to put out the flames, shouting and shoving each other in their haste. Amidst the chaos, Jake grabbed Lyra's hand and pulled her away from the scene. "Come on," he urged, dragging her deeper into the forest. "We need to get out of here, now." Lyra followed without question, her trust in him unwavering. As they disappeared into the shadows of the trees, Jake couldn't help but wonder if they truly escaped, or if they were simply delaying the inevitable. The forest was alive with the sounds of panic behind them, but Jake and Lyra pressed on, their footsteps crunching softly against the damp leaves. Jake's heart pounded in his chest as he led her deeper into the woods, away from the chaos they had left behind. His mind raced, trying to piece together a plan that didn't end with them being captured, or worse. Lyra followed closely, her glowing orb clutched tightly in one hand. She hadn't spoken since they fled, but her presence was steady, grounding him even as fear threatened to overwhelm him. Every few steps, she glanced over her shoulder, her luminous eyes scanning the darkness for any sign of pursuit. "They'll come after us," Jake muttered under his breath, more to himself than to her. "They won't just let this go." Lyra nodded silently, understanding enough of his words to grasp the gravity of the situation. Her expression remained calm, though there was a flicker of worry in her gaze. Jake couldn't blame her. If he were in her position, stranded on an alien planet with no allies except one reluctant human, he'd feel pretty hopeless too. "We need somewhere safe to hide," Jake continued, glancing around at the dense trees surrounding them. "Somewhere they won't think to look." He thought back to the countless hours he'd spent exploring these woods as a kid, building forts and dreaming up adventures. There was a place, an old hunting cabin deep in the forest that hadn't been used in years. It wasn't much, but it might buy them some time. "This way," he said, adjusting his grip on her hand and veering off the path. They moved quickly, weaving between trees and ducking under low-hanging branches. The air grew cooler as they ventured further from the clearing, the hum of the mob fading into the distance. After what felt like an eternity, they reached the cabin. It was small and weathered, its wooden walls sagging slightly under the weight of time. A thick layer of moss covered the roof, and vines snaked their way up the sides, making it blend almost seamlessly into the forest. If you didn't know it was there, you'd never notice it. Jake pushed open the creaky door and ushered Lyra inside. The interior was dark and musty, filled with the scent of damp wood and forgotten memories. An old table stood in the center of the room, surrounded by mismatched chairs, and a rusted stove sat in the corner, its chimney poking through the ceiling. "It's not much," Jake admitted, brushing cobwebs away from a chair before sitting down. "But it should keep us hidden for now." Lyra looked around, her glowing eyes taking in every detail. She seemed both curious and wary, as if unsure whether to trust this new shelter. Finally, she set the orb gently on the table and turned to face Jake. "Thank you," she said haltingly, her voice soft and musical despite the broken English. "You help me." Jake managed a weak smile, though his stomach churned with unease. "Don't thank me yet. We're not out of this mess." She tilted her head, studying him intently. "Why you help?" Her question caught him off guard, and for a moment, he didn't know how to answer. Why had he risked everything for her? He barely knew her, and she came from a world so different from his own that it might as well have been another universe. Yet something about her, the way she carried herself, the quiet strength in her eyes, had struck a chord deep within him. "I don't know," he admitted finally, running a hand through his hair. "Maybe because no one else would." Lyra considered this, her expression thoughtful. Then, without warning, she reached out and placed a hand on his arm. Her touch was cool and gentle, sending a shiver down his spine. For a brief moment, images flashed through his mind, flashes of fire and destruction, of a sky choked with ash and smoke. He saw cities crumbling, people fleeing in terror, and a desperate fleet of ships launching into the void of space. It was overwhelming, visceral, and utterly heartbreaking. Jake staggered back, gasping for air as the visions faded. Lyra withdrew her hand, her expression apologetic. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I show you my home." Jake stared at her, his pulse racing. What he'd seen, it was real. All of it. Her world wasn't just dying, it was already dead, reduced to ashes by forces beyond comprehension. And somehow, she had survived, carrying the last hope of her people in that tiny green orb. "You're not lying," he murmured, still trying to process what he'd witnessed. "Your world, it's gone." Lyra nodded solemnly. "Yes. But I carry hope. This," she gestured to the orb on the table, "can fix, can heal. Not just my world. Yours too." Jake sank into a chair, his mind reeling. He had always thought of Earth as flawed but resilient, capable of bouncing back from whatever damage humanity inflicted upon it. But seeing the devastation of Lyra's world made him realize how fragile everything truly was. If Earth continued down its current path, it could easily meet the same fate. "What do we do now?" he asked, looking up at her. "Even if I believe you, and I do, how do we convince them? The town won't listen. They're too scared." Lyra hesitated, then picked up the orb and held it close to her chest. "We try again. Show them truth. Show them power." Jake sighed, shaking his head. "It's not that simple. Fear makes people irrational. They see you as a threat, not a solution. Then, we find other way," Lyra replied firmly, her voice steadier than before. "We cannot give up. Too much depends on this." Jake wanted to argue, to tell her that bravery alone wouldn't be enough to save them. But looking into her determined eyes, he found himself unable to say the words. Maybe she was right. Maybe giving up wasn't an option, not when so much was at stake. As they sat in silence, the distant murmur of voices drifted through the trees. Someone was coming. Whether it was Grayson or someone else, Jake couldn't tell, but one thing was certain: their reprieve was over. "They're here," Jake said quietly, standing and moving toward the door. "Stay behind me." Lyra nodded, clutching the orb tightly. Together, they stepped outside, ready to face whatever awaited them in the darkness. The night air was heavy with tension as Jake and Lyra stepped out of the cabin, their senses on high alert. The distant voices grew louder, accompanied by the flickering light of torches cutting through the trees. Whoever was searching for them wasn't far away now. Jake's mind raced, trying to come up with a plan. They couldn't fight, not against an entire mob armed with weapons and fear-fueled determination. Running deeper into the forest might buy them some time, but it wouldn't solve the problem. Sooner or later, they'd be cornered, and then what? "We need to make them listen," Jake muttered under his breath, glancing at Lyra. She stood beside him, her glowing orb held firmly in both hands. Her expression was calm, almost serene, but there was a steeliness in her eyes that told him she was ready for whatever came next. "Show them again," she said softly, her voice barely audible over the rustling leaves. "Let them see." Jake hesitated. He knew what she meant. The orb's power had already proven itself once back at the creek. But replicating that miracle here, in front of an angry mob, felt like a gamble. What if it only made things worse? What if they saw it not as proof of hope, but as evidence of danger? Before he could respond, the first figures emerged from the trees. It was Sheriff Grayson, flanked by several townsfolk, their torches casting long shadows across the forest floor. Behind them loomed more people, their faces hardened with suspicion and anger. "There they are!" someone shouted, pointing toward Jake and Lyra. The group surged forward, spreading out to surround them. Jake raised his hands in a gesture of peace, though every muscle in his body screamed at him to run. "Wait!" he called out, his voice steady despite the pounding in his chest. "Just give us a minute to explain." Grayson stepped closer, his expression grim. "Explain what, kid? How you're helping this thing destroy our town?" "She's not destroying anything," Jake shot back, his frustration bubbling over. "She's trying to save us. All of us." A murmur rippled through the crowd, but no one lowered their torches. Fear still clung to them like a second skin, clouding their judgment and fueling their hostility. "Save us?" Grayson scoffed, shaking his head. "With that glowing ball of hers? You really expect us to believe that?" "Yes," Jake snapped, stepping forward. "Look around you. Our planet is dying too. Pollution, climate change, wars, it's all killing us slowly. But she has the answer. That orb can fix it. It can heal the land, clean the water, bring life back to places we've ruined." For a moment, doubt flickered in Grayson's eyes, and a few members of the mob exchanged uncertain glances. But then a voice rang out from the back of the group. "He's lying!" the man shouted, his tone venomous. "That thing is dangerous. Look at her, she's not even human. Who knows what kind of tricks she's using to fool us?" The accusation reignited the mob's fury. Torches were raised higher, and angry shouts filled the air once more. Jake clenched his fists, his heart sinking as he realized reason wasn't going to work this time either. "Fine," he said suddenly, turning to Lyra. "Do it. Show them." Lyra looked at him, her glowing eyes wide with concern. "Are you sure?" "I don't have a better idea," Jake admitted, his voice low. "If they won't listen to words, maybe they'll listen to proof." Without another word, Lyra stepped forward, holding the orb aloft. Its soft green glow intensified, bathing the clearing in an ethereal light. The mob fell silent, their attention drawn irresistibly to the pulsating sphere in her hands. "This is my world's last hope," Lyra said, her voice clear and firm despite the tremor of emotion beneath it. "It can heal yours too. Watch." She closed her eyes and focused, her brow furrowing with concentration. Slowly, the orb began to hum, its vibrations resonating through the ground beneath their feet. Then, with a sudden burst of energy, beams of light shot outward, illuminating the surrounding trees and plants. Gasps erupted from the crowd as the transformation began. Dead leaves crunched underfoot turned vibrant green, sprouting new growth before their very eyes. Twisted, gnarled branches stretched skyward, blossoming into lush canopies of foliage. Even the moss-covered bark of nearby trees seemed to rejuvenate, shedding decades of decay in mere seconds. But the true miracle came when Lyra directed the orb toward a patch of barren earth near the edge of the clearing. Where moments ago there had been nothing but dirt and rocks, a field of wildflowers now bloomed in dazzling colors, blues, purples, yellows, all swaying gently in the breeze. The mob stared in stunned silence, their torches forgotten as they took in the impossible sight before them. Some dropped to their knees, tears streaming down their faces, while others simply gaped, unable to comprehend what they were witnessing. "It's beautiful," someone whispered, breaking the spell. Grayson looked shaken, his usual stoic demeanor cracked wide open. He glanced at Jake, then at Lyra, his jaw working as if struggling to find words. You see? Jake pressed, seizing the moment. This isn't destruction. This is salvation. She's not our enemy, she's our ally. If we help her, she can help us. Together, we can fix everything that's broken. For a moment, it seemed like the tide might turn. Hope flickered in the crowd's eyes, fragile but real. But just as Jake dared to believe they might finally understand, a sharp crack echoed through the clearing. Everyone turned to see flames licking at the base of a nearby tree, ignited by a stray ember from one of the torches. Panic erupted instantly, spreading faster than the fire itself. People scrambled to put out the blaze, shouting and shoving each other in their haste. In the chaos, a figure emerged from the shadows, a wiry man clutching a rifle. His name was Tom, one of the most vocal opponents of Lyra's presence. Without hesitation, he raised the weapon and aimed it directly at her. No! Jake yelled, lunging forward to shield Lyra. The gunshot rang out, deafening in the confined space of the clearing. Time seemed to slow as Jake braced himself for impact. But instead of pain, he heard a cry behind him. Turning, he saw Lyra stumble backward, clutching her side where blood seeped through her fingers. Her glowing orb slipped from her grasp, rolling across the ground. No! Jake screamed again, catching her as she collapsed. Lyra! The mob froze, the weight of what had just happened crashing down on them. Grayson stared at the rifle in Tom's hands, his face pale with shock. What have you done? The sheriff demanded, his voice trembling with rage. Tom backed away, his own expression a mix of defiance and horror. I was protecting us. She's dangerous. Jake ignored them, focusing solely on Lyra. Her breathing was shallow, her glowing eyes dimming with each passing second. Blood pooled beneath her, staining the newly grown grass. Hold on, Jake begged, pressing his hands against her wound in a futile attempt to stop the bleeding. Please hold on. Lyra reached up weakly, her hand brushing his cheek. Thank you, she whispered, her voice barely audible. You tried. Her eyes fluttered shut, and the faint glow emanating from her body began to fade. No! Jake shouted, shaking her gently. Don't leave me! Not now! As despair threatened to consume him, the green orb lying nearby began to pulse with light once more. Its glow grew brighter, enveloping both Jake and Lyra in a warm, soothing radiance. And then, something extraordinary happened. The pulsating light from the green orb enveloped Jake and Lyra, bathing them in an otherworldly glow that seemed to hum with life. The crowd, still frozen in shock, watched as the orb's energy intensified, casting strange shadows across the clearing. For a moment, it felt as though time itself had stopped, holding its breath. Jake knelt beside Lyra, his hands trembling as he pressed against her wound. Her breathing was shallow, almost imperceptible, and her once bright eyes were closed. Tears streamed down his face, blurring his vision, but he refused to look away. He couldn't lose her, not now, not after everything they'd been through. Lyra, he whispered hoarsely, leaning closer. Please, don't give up. As if in response, the orb released a surge of energy, sending waves of warmth rippling outward. Jake gasped as the sensation washed over him, soothing his aching muscles and calming the frantic pounding of his heart. But it wasn't just him. The light seemed to seep into Lyra's body, mending the damage done by the bullet. Her glowing skin began to brighten again, the faint flicker of life returning to her features. Slowly, her eyelids fluttered open, revealing those luminous almond-shaped eyes that had first captivated Jake when they met. She stared up at him, confusion mingling with gratitude. What happened? She murmured, her voice weak but steady. You're healing, Jake breathed, barely able to believe what he was seeing. The orb, it's fixing you. The crowd murmured in awe, their earlier hostility replaced by wonder and disbelief. Even Tom, the man who had fired the shot, looked stricken, his rifle hanging limply at his side. Sheriff Grayson stepped forward cautiously, his expression unreadable. This isn't possible, Grayson muttered, shaking his head. How is this happening? It's her technology, Jake explained, his voice rising with urgency. It's advanced beyond anything we've ever seen. This orb can heal wounds, repair ecosystems. It can save lives. Grayson glanced at Lyra, then at the glowing orb, his skepticism warring with the undeniable evidence before him. Even if that's true, why should we trust her? What does she want from us? She wants to help, Jake insisted, his tone firm. She came here because her world is gone, destroyed by fire and war. That orb is her last hope, for her people, for Earth, for everyone. If we turn our backs on her now, we're throwing away the chance to fix everything we've broken. The sheriff hesitated, clearly torn. Some members of the mob nodded in agreement, while others scowled, unwilling to let go of their fears so easily. The tension in the air was palpable, a fragile balance between hope and hostility. Before anyone could speak, Lyra sat up slowly, her movements deliberate but steady. She placed a hand on Jake's shoulder, steadying herself, and turned to face the crowd. Her glowing eyes scanned the faces around her, lingering on each person long enough to meet their gaze. "I am not your enemy," she said softly, her voice carrying a quiet authority that silenced even the most vocal skeptics. "I came seeking help, not harm. My world is lost, but yours can still be saved. Together, we can heal what has been broken." Her words hung in the air, simple yet profound. For the first time since her arrival, the townsfolk truly listened, not out of obligation or curiosity, but because they saw the truth in her eyes. She wasn't asking for pity or sympathy, she was offering a lifeline. A young woman near the front of the crowd stepped forward hesitantly, tears streaming down her cheeks. "You really can fix things?" she asked, her voice trembling. "You can make the land grow again? Clean the rivers?" Lyra nodded, her expression gentle. "Yes. But I cannot do it alone. I need your trust. Your cooperation." The woman looked at the others, her uncertainty giving way to determination. "We have to try," she said firmly. "What do we have to lose?" Her words sparked a ripple effect, spreading through the crowd like wildfire. One by one, people lowered their torches and weapons, their expressions softening as hope began to take root. Even Tom, the man who had fired the shot, hung his head in shame, unable to meet anyone's gaze. Sheriff Grayson sighed deeply, running a hand over his face. "All right," he said finally, his voice heavy with resignation. "Let's hear her out. But if she steps out of line—" "She won't," Jake interrupted, his voice unwavering. "I'll vouch for her." Grayson studied him for a moment, then nodded reluctantly. "Fine. But this is on you, kid." Relief flooded Jake's chest, though he knew the battle wasn't over yet. Trust was fragile, and fear could resurface at any moment. But for now, they had a chance, a slim one, but a chance nonetheless. Lyra stood slowly, her strength returning with every passing second. She picked up the glowing orb, cradling it gently in her hands. "Thank you," she said, addressing the crowd. "Your world is beautiful, and it deserves to live. With your help, we can make it thrive again." The crowd murmured in agreement, some nodding, others wiping away tears. It was a tentative alliance, born of desperation and newfound hope, but it was enough to start. As the mob dispersed, murmuring amongst themselves, Jake turned to Lyra, his heart still racing. "Are you okay?" he asked, concern etched into his features. She smiled faintly, placing a hand over her side where the wound had been. "I will be. Thanks to you." Jake shook his head, his voice thick with emotion. "I didn't do anything. You saved yourself, and maybe all of us." Lyra tilted her head, studying him intently. "No. You gave me a reason to fight. Without you, I would have given up." Her words struck a chord deep within him, filling him with a sense of purpose he hadn't felt in years. He realized then that this wasn't just about saving Earth or Lyra's people. It was about proving that humanity could rise above its fears and prejudices. That even in the darkest moments, there was always a choice to do better. As dawn broke over the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and pink, Jake and Lyra stood together in the clearing, surrounded by the remnants of the forest she had healed. The road ahead would be long and fraught with challenges, but for the first time in what felt like forever, Jake allowed himself to feel hopeful. The first rays of sunlight filtered through the trees, casting golden streaks across the forest floor. The air smelled fresh and alive, as if the earth itself had taken a deep breath after years of suffocation. Jake stood beside Lyra, watching as the townsfolk slowly dispersed, their torches extinguished and their weapons abandoned. Some lingered nearby, hesitant but curious, while others retreated into the woods, whispering amongst themselves. For now, the immediate danger had passed. But Jake knew better than to think this fragile truce would last without effort. Trust was like glass, easy to shatter and nearly impossible to piece back together once broken. Still, the fact that they were even standing here, alive and hopeful, felt like a miracle in itself. Lyra turned to him, her glowing orb cradled gently in her hands. Her expression was calm, though there was a flicker of uncertainty in her eyes. "What happens now?" she asked softly, her voice tinged with both hope and apprehension. Jake hesitated, his mind racing. He wanted to reassure her, to promise her that everything would be okay, but he couldn't bring himself to lie, not to her, not after everything they'd been through. Instead, he chose honesty. "I don't know," he admitted, rubbing the back of his neck. "But we'll figure it out. Together." Her lips curved into a small smile, and for a moment, the weight on his shoulders seemed just a little lighter. Whatever came next, at least they wouldn't face it alone. Over the next few days, the town of Silver Ridge underwent a transformation unlike anything anyone could have predicted. Word spread quickly about what had happened in the forest, the miraculous healing of the land, the alien girl who carried a device capable of restoring life itself. At first, skepticism reigned supreme, with many dismissing the story as nothing more than wild rumors or outright lies. But then people began to see the changes for themselves. The polluted creek near Blackwater Creek, once murky and lifeless, now teemed with fish and clean water. Dead fields that had lain barren for decades sprouted lush crops overnight. Even the old hunting cabin where Jake and Lyra had hidden was surrounded by vibrant greenery, its wooden walls covered in ivy and blooming flowers. Curiosity replaced fear, drawing people from neighboring towns to witness the phenomenon firsthand. Some came seeking answers, others hoping to catch a glimpse of Lyra herself. To their surprise, she didn't shy away from them. Instead, she greeted each visitor with quiet dignity, explaining her mission and demonstrating the orb's power whenever necessary. It wasn't easy. Suspicion still lingered in some corners, and not everyone welcomed her presence. A few stubborn holdouts refused to believe her intentions were pure, accusing her of manipulating the townsfolk or hiding ulterior motives. But for every doubter, there were 10 supporters eager to help her succeed. Among those supporters was Sheriff Grayson, whose initial hostility had softened into reluctant respect. Though he remained wary, he couldn't deny the evidence before his eyes, or the sincerity in Lyra's voice when she spoke of her desire to heal, not harm. "She's not our enemy," Grayson told the townsfolk during one of the community meetings held to discuss Lyra's presence. "If anything, she's given us a second chance, a way to fix the mistakes we've made. Are we really gonna throw that away because we're scared?" His words resonated deeply, swaying even the most skeptical minds. Slowly but surely, the tide turned in Lyra's favor. People began volunteering their time and resources to assist her, offering whatever they could to support her mission. Farmers donated land for experiments, engineers studied the orb's technology, to the best of their limited understanding, and children drew pictures of Lyra surrounded by flowers and animals, pinning them up in shop windows as tokens of gratitude. Through it all, Jake remained by her side, acting as both protector and translator. He marveled at how quickly she adapted to human customs, learning phrases and gestures that helped bridge the gap between their worlds. In return, she shared glimpses of her own culture, soft melodies hummed under her breath, intricate patterns etched into the dirt with a stick, stories of her people's struggles and triumphs. "You miss them, don't you?" Jake asked one evening as they sat together outside the hunting cabin, watching the sunset paint the sky in fiery hues. Lyra nodded, her gaze distant. Every day. But I carry them with me, in my heart, in this orb. Their hope lives on through me. Jake reached over, placing a hand on hers. You're stronger than you realize, you know that? What you've done, it's incredible. She smiled faintly, turning her hand to grasp his. Not alone. You helped me. Without you, I might have given up. He shook his head, his voice thick with emotion. You're the one who inspires me, Lyra. Seeing what you're capable of, it makes me want to be better. To do better.